Anbernic is once again releasing another new product in the same family of devices that we have grown to love and loathe at the same time for some people. And that is the Anbernic XX family of systems. I don't really understand the XX branding, but it just seems to be like a way to infinitely update the same handheld, which is perfectly fine. In fact, it's actually rather smart. But it starts to get confusing when you have several different handhelds you're selling at the same exact time with very similar names, and the only difference being 0.5 inches in terms of its size, and adding some sort of letter to differentiate all of these other handhelds from each other. They have the Vs, they have the H models, and they also just have the labelless ones that are almost identical to the V variants, but aren't, but similar. It's really confusing. But for the most recent handheld that Anbernic has announced and has released info about is the Anbernic RG40XX V, which is just another version of the standard handheld we've been getting for the last year or so. The main thing that separates this handheld from the rest is that it is a vertical form factor of the recently released Anbernic RG40XX-H, hence the V standing for vertical. So it's actually a pretty interesting device. The main thing is that it has a 4-inch screen compared to the 35 models, but that is to be expected because considering the other 40 series also has a 4-inch screen, what a crazy concept. But it also maintains the same H700 chipset. Hasn't been 100% confirmed that's the case, but it's safe to assume since it shares similar naming schemes and it is considered to be a part of the same line and all these handhelds share the same H700 chipset, it is safe to assume that this device will also carry that same chipset. And as we established before, it is a perfectly capable chipset and actually is very performant, but shows little innovation. I would have loved to see some T618 chipset, maybe a slightly lower tier version of that, something to be a little bit more competitive. But I understand not necessarily doing that for this specific handheld because the 40XX-V is as I mentioned before, a DMG styled handheld with a vertical layout, which in all honesty is pretty good. I really like these DMG styled handhelds, but I only really like them when they're small and cheap. But that isn't to say this device isn't going to be cheap. This device is going to be around $70, which is a perfectly reasonable price point. But to me, continues to blur the lines in this entire lineup. All these devices are between $60 to $70. And it makes it kind of annoying for any newcomer who's not familiar with, emulation handhelds in general to purchase these handhelds. And it's like, which one do I buy? They're all almost the same price. But when it comes to the design of the device, it is a very nice looking device. It has these ultra slim bezels that look phenomenal. The 640 by 480, square display is an amazing display. Wish it was a little higher resolution, especially at this size, but I'll live with it. And it's definitely not one of the other or crappier options out there. So in comparing it to other handhelds of similar sizes, I feel like Anbernic could have done more. But there are, like I said, plenty of other options out there, but I feel like Anbernic does a pretty consistent job of making these devices feel nice and high quality feeling, even though most of these standard devices have more of a plastic build. But as long as you're not buying the 28XX, they all feel relatively solid in the hand, so I wouldn't necessarily expect this one to be any different. What would be a massive deal breaker for this device is if it has a terrible D-pad and face buttons. Because when I see these DMG styled handhelds, I see it as the perfect device to play all your 2D, 8, 16-bit, Game Boy, Super Nintendo, all that generation or style of games. Because otherwise, it's just a relatively uncomfortable experience if you're trying to play 3D titles. It does have one analog stick, but it might be only useful for PS1 games, but if you try playing N64, it might be a little uncomfortable. But you probably wouldn't be buying this device for 3D titles anyways, because they have the 40XX-H model, which makes more sense, broadly speaking, for 3D titles. So seeing the analog stick on this thing is nice, but it seems a bit superfluous in the end when inevitably you're not going to be using this for 3D titles just because of, not being the most comfortable device for that. But for 2D titles, it should be amazing. Only if, though, the D-pad and face buttons are of good quality, because Anbernic has done amazing D-pads before, but they've also had some pretty terrible D-pads. So I seriously hope for this DMG style device they put a little bit more effort into ensuring some consistent quality in terms of their D-pad and face buttons. And at the price point, probably going to be around $70, it's cool, but I just wish they either made this thing like incredibly cheap or just decided to put an updated, more powerful processor in this thing. Because honestly, I'm getting a little bored of all these H700 chipset devices. And I get it, Anbernic's probably just slowly working through their entire lineup and replacing them with H700 chipset devices because they've been doing this RG40XX something chipset for a very long time in their older devices, and now they're kind of updating the entire lineup of slowly but surely with H700 chipset devices, which, in all honesty, is a much powerful chipset. But it is getting a little tiresome with all these similarly spec'd, similarly designed devices coming out. It makes it very boring. The 40XXV will be coming in 3 colors, a nice dark blue, a clean white, and a transparent black, which personally I like the look of the most. The white one's pretty good, but blue, it feels a bit, stand outy, I guess. I don't know how to better describe it. I'm just not a big fan of a bold color for my handheld. I usually go for black, white, or clear. Pretty standard color options. But for people who like that extra spice of a brighter color, blue is definitely there. With the release of the Anbernic RG40XX, Anbernic made one of the best landscape 4-inch handhelds out there. And I'll be really interested to see how this newer 4-inch DMG style handheld goes, because the only other handhelds I can remember out of the top of my head that are about around this 4-inch size are like the Analog Pocket and a few other like Powkitty devices. But there aren't huge amounts of these 4-inch DMG style handhelds. They mostly hover around the 3.5 inches to 3-inch, display range, because a lot of the more popular handhelds in this category, like the Miyoo Mini and the aforementioned RG35XX Plus 2024 edition, you see what I mean though. There's a lot of handhelds that Anbernic has in this specific style that are confusingly named. But either way, tangent aside, this is going to potentially be one of the best handhelds in this specific size category. And I'd be really interested to see how it turns out. I would love to hear what you guys think. Are you interested in the device? I am really curious because I'm getting a little tired of this, and I would love to hear if you guys are too. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. All the other social media garbage down below. And last but not least, have a wonderful day.